Women moving toward healing, wake up, reach out. This summer, someone in our congregation stood up and told us of her fear of living in our country at this time. As a mother raising multiracial family, she fears for the safety of her children, and she fears for their future. And near tears, she seemed close to despair. In fact, she may have even used those words. We are called to God to create on earth as it is in heaven, and that includes treating others as we wish to be treated, with empathy and respect, because that is what Jesus taught. It is called love. And yet the current policies and actions coming from the White House and from Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, are unfathomable. Now plans are to house over 35,000 detainees in Texas military camps, one of which is a Superfund site, and the other which is equally polluted with carcinogens. And babies ripped from their immigrant parents are now being adopted out to U.S. families without even telling their deported parents. We have money being thrown at the wealthy and then squeezed out of the elderly programs for the poor. This week, the U.S. voted no with Saudi Arabia and Iran against a bill that would make it a crime to kill gay people. It is incomprehensible. In 1 week in July, the Supreme Court tossed out the right to unionize, protections for the sexual minority communities, and interfered with women's reproductive health. And that was just in 1 week, the week I preached this the first time around. Without calls for ethical standards for this current administration and cabinet members, or financial accountability, the future of our democracy dims. So we have every right to be afraid for our children and our country. So my task today is to ask, how shall we respond to this apparent wickedness that is all around us? Our scripture reading is about two females, and because it was a woman in our congregation who voiced her fears and despair, I want to focus on women. If you're a male, please hang in there and listen with me. We'll get to you too. I want to lift up the very real fears of the mothers in this room, the women who have been silenced but who are finally now speaking out on the hashtag #MeToo movement, the women of color who are leading Black Lives Matter, and the immigrant mothers who are wailing for their stolen children. What can the stories of these two females in Mark 5, a sick woman and a sick girl, show us about confronting our fears and bringing healing to ourselves and to our planet? That is not the question the writer of Mark was addressing. He was focusing on Jesus' authority and his ministry. But the writer and Jesus lived in a time when women had no power, no ability to testify in court, no control over their marriages or their lives. It was an era when I wonder if most women weren't always a little bit afraid and also lived in despair. So let's turn to these women who needed healing, because we do too. Jairus' daughter was 12. Because it's unusual that this fact was mentioned, I suspect it's because it is significant. It was a marriageable age, and most likely meant an arranged marriage was in the works. You will remember the story of Isaac's servant returning to Abraham's homeland for a bride for his grieving master. After Rebekah was spotted, Isaac's servant bargained with the brother and her father for the bride price. A deal was struck among the men, and after throwing a few golden bracelets for Rebekah, they completed the deal and hurriedly packed her off, leaving her family behind. So I wonder if this girl's father, Jairus, as a well-placed synagogue leader, would receive money and gifts from a suitor from an arranged marriage. Jairus' daughter may well have been worth a significant amount due to her father's position. Or maybe she was just a sickly child and Jairus needed her well soon so as not to stall his plans. Or perhaps she had caught word that her childhood was coming to an end and she would soon belong to an older man. Perhaps that was why she was sick. Was she sick with fear of leaving her home and her mother? Or of the terror of an arranged marriage with an older man not of her choosing? Was she sick with powerlessness? Did she despair and take to her bed, refusing to eat? Christian theologian Carter Hayward says that the biggest sin women commit is not taking themselves seriously, not believing that we really matter, or that we can make a difference. So sin for women is when we deny that we have a place in the world. But the truth is that this is exactly the world this child lived in. She didn't matter. No one took her seriously. And many women today feel the same way, particularly those whom society puts on the margins. Women of color, trans women, lesbians, older women, poor women, heavy women, disabled women, to name just a few. I was reminded of this societal expectation of silence of women at the Pride Parade this summer, when a member of the infamous Fred Phelps Church, Kansas, yelled at me through a bullhorn, telling me I was not allowed to speak or to teach men according to his Bible. Because women don't matter, white women are tempted to believe the lie that men will always take care of us, at least if we obey the rules and are good girls. That means if we don't upset the apple cart of male dominion. But if we try to obey this fiction, it is always at the expense of our sisters of color who've always known that's a lie. The dismissal and trivialization of the word of a professional white woman who tearfully tells of a sexual assault at the age of 15 by one who is now a Supreme Court justice is the latest example on the national scene that no, women really don't matter. Perhaps as a result of not valuing women, a woman's faith too often gets reduced to personal piety just between me and God. This keeps us quiet. It keeps us uninvolved. In the book, No Excuses, the author points out the typical ways women avoid or give up power. We are reluctant to speak first. We apologize constantly in conversation. We don't rush confidently to put ourselves out there or take risks or get our ideas into the marketplace the way men usually do. Instead, our strategy is usually to hang back and let others have their say first. And of course, we give others the floor. And when we do this, our futures get negotiated away by others because we think we would be rude or selfish or bossy if we put ourselves into a leadership role. If we were audacious enough to say, I've had enough, we might even be called a nasty woman. But this silence keeps us imprisoned in our fears and despair and isolated from our sisters, powerless. And this can lead to death. Despair unto death, sick unto death, too often leading lives of quiet desperation, as the poet Thoreau put it. And Jairus' daughter did die. And it took the touch of Jesus to awaken her to life again. Dying is about heartsick mothers who sought asylum in this country only to have their children kidnapped by the U.S. government. Now labeled as illegals and sitting in various detention camps like in Berks County, Pennsylvania, they weep for their lost children, many of whom the state had failed to even keep records for. But in Berks County, the general fund gets over $1 million a year of easy money that comes into their general coffers for this arrangement with ICE. And our so-called liberal governor said in July he would not shut it down. There are voters in Berks County, after all, who need jobs. So where is the touch of Jesus to come from that would awaken these mothers to live again? Theologian Carter Hayward says, our greatest work is to be the lover. Helping people see that includes loving ourselves, Love means we will stand up for ourselves and also unconditionally act on behalf of others. Like Jesus turning over the merchants' tables in the temple. Love means we fight for one another. We work for freedom and equality for one another. We need both rage and compassion in equal measure. Both are required to create justice. Rage and compassion. Well-behaved women seldom make history, remember. I have that t-shirt too. That'll be another segment. In writing to women leaders, author Sheryl Sandberg asked, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Would we stop being so well-behaved Christians? According to Disciple of Christ pastor Jennifer Crumpton in a book called Femme Evangelical, redemption has to start with recognizing who we really are instead of denying it, and then giving that identity a voice. Who we really are, God's people, lovers, and then giving that identity a voice. She says, it is not about killing off our former selves. It is about growing them up from the earth and grass, always rising. A black woman who was proudly not well behaved and who was one of my heroes was Maya Angelou. And she recognized that who she really was, and she gave that identity a voice when she wrote, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may tread me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like rising suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, because I laugh like I got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling. I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream. I am the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. And this brings me to the story that precedes Jairus' daughter. The woman who had had enough. Her illness meant that for 12 years she had been treated by society as untouchable, literally and figuratively. She had spent all of her money on the medical experts of the day with nothing to show for it. So when she hears of a healer in Galilee, she struck out one morning to find her own healing. Fed up with her lot in life, she took things into her own hands. Unafraid, she was going to do something she was not supposed to do. A hemorrhaging woman touching a man in public, no less. Let's be clear. Well-behaved women do not act like this. It's true, she was going to try not to make a scene or get caught. But she was done being nice and playing by the rules. It was her life. She saw an opportunity and she took it. What would you do if you weren't afraid, is the question. You would reach out for the hem of that garment in front of you. You would say, I don't care if it's against the rules or if it's illegal even. I don't care if you think it's uncivil. I want healing. I want to live in a world with less pain, no untouchables. One theologian reminds us that faith is about a combination of kneeling down and standing up. Dorothée Soila says there are two movements. Kneeling down and standing up belong together and are done in tandem. The senior pastor at All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City said, men don't have to wake up in the morning and decide we are going to discriminate against women, because there are religious, political, and social structures already firmly in place that will ensure that it keeps happening, regardless of whether we consciously do it. He says, my message to young women is that it doesn't have to be this way. It's wrong that it is, and you don't have to put up with it. My message to young men is that sitting back and taking advantage of structural violence is not your prerogative. To the extent you are willing to hitch your wagon to old-fashioned sexism and bigotry that religion, politics, and social systems have made possible, you are wrong. You need to act and think differently, and it's your responsibility to live differently than your grandfather, your father, and even the world around you today and the men in your peer group. What would you do if you weren't afraid? You would kneel down to get centered in the Spirit, and then stand up and push back against all that dehumanizes, whether it's for our own liberation or our sisters and our brothers, whether it be for U.S. citizens who are poor or old or foreigners seeking asylum. Putting aside her fears, the sick woman had enough. She stood up and reached out and grabbed the hem of that garment. Liberation, healing. That was the vision for her. That is the vision for us. And Jesus said, her healing wasn't about him or his power. It was her vision of wholeness that brought the healing. Her faith that she had acted on as a not so well-behaved woman. Some would call her a nasty woman. And this reminds me of several other not so well-behaved women, but none better than Sojourner Truth, who was born in slavery in 1797 in New York and sold along with a flock of sheep for $100 at the age of 9. But she escaped to freedom from a cruel master at 20 years later, taking one baby daughter. There was something about her struggle and pain that had made her unafraid. And at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in 1851, where, if memory serves me right, she was not an invited speaker, she made an extemporaneous speech that turned the convention of primarily white abolitionist women on its head. Like the outcast hemorrhaging woman in our scripture, Sojourner saw an opportunity and took it. And she stood on her own behalf and she said, that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lift over ditches and have to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it. And bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I had borne 13 children and seen most all of them sold off into slavery. And when I cried out in my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? And then that little man over in black over there says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, then these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they are asking it, and the men better laugh. What would you do if you weren't afraid, church? Turn the world upside down so it could be right side up again. Despair is an overwhelming, passive emotion. Despair is waiting for other people, someone else, to make the change. In order to get to the longed-for healing, we have to stand up and rise. Rising, as the prophet says, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. Ain't we a people deserving of love and respect, of a community and opportunity and inclusion? Pastor Crumpton says, we must intentionally go out of our way to fill our hearts with strong, loving, productive, positive, nurturing, affirming, and female supportive things. And the way we get to that, according to her, is to have a God, and this is a direct quote, a God who is nonviolent, peaceful, righteously pissed off, idealistic, equality-driven, and loving. What would you do if you weren't afraid, church? As we reach for the hem of that garment to claim healing for ourselves and the world, may we hear Jesus respond to us. It is your healing and your standing up faith that has made you whole. It is your raging and compassionate faith that has healed you. It is your love that has cast out all fear. And so let us, with Maya and all those not so well-behaved people, say, still we rise together. May it be so. Go in peace.